seem very optimistic about the future of online payments. I was surprised because I have to say it's a world I was not familiar with, and that was the fun aspect about it, because I didn't know much about open payments online, and talking firsthand with people who do that day in, day out, it opened up a whole new world for me. And I think also because they were not expecting to see art. Everybody I spoke to believes that there should be and that there can be more equity regarding open payments. It made me also quite optimistic,
Welcome to the Future Money podcast presented by the Interledger Foundation, where we invite people of all backgrounds and disciplines to imagine what a financially inclusive future might be.
I'm Hollis Wong-Ware, a community ambassador with the Interledger Foundation.
I am Nawil Karama, program officer at the Interledger Foundation. In this episode, we're in conversation with Lena Ghaninejad, a chef and a food artist currently based in Paris, France. Lena uses food as a medium for building bridges between people, places, and various fields of knowledge, as well as between the past and future scenarios.
She will share more about what inspired her to work with food and about her project, Liminal Matter, her use of materials from holograms to seeds, and generally how materiality can be used as a tool for dialogue and community building.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello, Lena. We're so excited to speak with you today and to hear more about the process of your work, your background as an artist, and your experience at the Interledger Summit, bringing your piece to life as part of the Future Money Open Studios. So tell us about your background and what led you to become a practicing artist.
So sure. So my name is Lena, and I work with food as a medium. So I have a background in kitchen, so in cooking, and I also have a background in art history. And I'm doing a master's in agroecology, ecology of agriculture. So that's, my background is threefold. And I work with food as a medium, so I use it as a means for expressing ideas, whether it's my ideas or other people's ideas, because I also receive a lot of creative briefs. But mostly I would say I use it as a means for connection and a medium to build relationships. So, when you cook, you alchemize ingredients together. And then when you share the food with people, you alchemize people together. And I think that's one common point with a work of art, actually. And also building bridges between people and the ecosystem they live in. That's how I see my work. Building bridges through living matter. Yeah.
It's amazing, actually. So currently you're based in Paris, in France, and it's kind of like returning back home. Well, you didn't grow up there, right?
So I was born in Sydney because my parents used to travel a lot. But we came back to Paris. I was a baby. And then at the age of 8, I moved to Lyon. And then I lived in London from the age of 7 till to 30. And then Amsterdam. But basically, I lived in all sorts of different places. But Paris is the only place that always felt like home. And it was always the place I kept coming back to. So it really feels like a homecoming this year, for sure. Yeah.
And why is that?
Why? It's a good question. I think it's because I spent my early years here. Mm-hmm. From the age of 1 till 8 or 9. And I kept on coming back every year because I always kept friends and alive here. So it's the only city that really feels like home amongst all the places where I lived.
So I guess I'll ask, with your background being French and also Iranian, I'm curious about the relationship between your upbringing and your cultural background with your interest and passion for food.
So, of course, both French culture and Iranian culture are equally passionate about food and they take equal pride in their food culture. But they have very different approaches to food. I would say that Iranian food is just like Iranian culture in general, extremely layered and intricate. And I think I'm more of a minimalist person when it comes to the way I use food. But what I take from the Iranian side is not in the cooking itself, but in the creative process. Iranian culture is really big on poetry and double entendre, and everything is quite implicit. And there's a lot of, space to read between the lines. And I like to take that and use that in my work And hopefully what I do and what I create is never to be taken at face value and is never so explicit so that the message is entirely clear, if that makes sense. So that's what I take from the Iranian culture in general. And then, of course, just on a more basic level, growing up in France, you just get used to just quality ingredients, and it's just a step. So it's not something you have to make a big effort about. It's something that's being passed on to you, I think, quite naturally from a young age. So
they're both quite passionate, but they have a lot of sensuality to it as well.
Definitely. They both have a love for poetry. They're both very sensual cultures, and I'm glad you mentioned that because we forget that about Iranian culture. But Iranian culture can be very sensual and sensory, and also quite feminine. There's a lot of women artists and women academics and intellectuals in Iran. So they do have things in common. And also in terms of language, there's quite a lot of French words in the Farsi language, which people are always surprised to find out about. But as for the contrasts, I would say that I would have to go down the political route right now. And yeah, I have to pass.
That's totally fair. And I think that's the beauty of art, right? Is that you can bring, whether it's your politics or your perspective or your philosophies, into work and transmute it from the literal spoken into, especially in your example, or in the work that you do, the experiential. And I think that was something that I know really drew folks to your work initially, was just the experiential nature of it, the inherent connectivity and dialogue and discourse within your work. I'd love to kind of hear the arc of how you entered into food and kind of that epiphany that catalyzed your interest in art.
So I think I started working in kitchens. I was trained in kitchens, and it was a very, very masculine and very almost military space. And deep down, I could feel that wasn't how I wanted to use food. It was a relational process in the sense that that's not the kind of spaces I want to evolve in if I want to use food. And it's not the kind of people I want to exchange with as well while I use food as a medium and while I cook. And little by little, I started doing more and more private events. And very organically, I started doing more and more conceptual things using food, because I just realized that, the more I was cooking, the more I was asking questions, to myself about where the food actually comes from and what's the best way to eat for everybody to eat well, and what's the best way to eat for, to preserve the environment. And so the more you cook, the more you use food, the more you ask yourself questions. And I felt that actually going down a more artistic and or conceptual route was a good way to ask the right questions, to an audience or to yourself, and to sort of play around with food as a medium in order to use it as a research medium and not just as a means to feed people with something that looks nice and tastes great. But I was interested in using it in a way that's slightly different and in a way that engages something beyond just the taste inside, and something that also makes you dream and makes you think and, strike, conversations about how, what is it? Is it edible? And how things could be as well in the future, because I think food is a means to connect the past tradition with the future. What's the best way to go forward now with our food system? So it was a way for me to tackle all of those issues using food. Yeah, and have fun while doing it.
Yeah, I love that notion of play too. I think oftentimes there's kind of a severity and a gravitas to...
Oh my God. I mean, yeah. No, like, please, let's talk about that. They take it so seriously.
I understand, obviously, there's like a importance, right, to work, but I think also what's lost is the levity, is the play, and like what's possible within play. And I think oftentimes, and I don't want to project, so would love to hear if this is authentic to your experience, but like, yeah, especially in the fine food world and the fine art world, there's a lot of pretension, a lot of self-importance, a lot of seriousness that kind of begets quality or there's just, a level in which
pretense?
Yeah, pretense. I was about to say like some patriarchal underpinnings also, as you were mentioning before, the kind of like very male world that you entered into in the food world. And what does it look like to convene people and for there to be actually like joy and light and play?
Yeah, totally. No, that's the thing. I think food is such an interesting medium because everybody relates to it on a very visceral level. It's not cognitive food, it's very visceral. You feel it in your guts. So people relate to it in a way that's very direct and it connects people instantly. And you were just mentioning how, the high end world of both food and art can be, a bit pretentious sometimes and a bit exclusive. And I think it's interesting because food is the most inclusive thing we have because we all have that in common. We all eat and we all love to eat, right? And so it really connects us at a very deep level. And for me, it brings me so much joy. And it's very amusing as well to, create an installation for an opening or do an installation in an art space. And it's usually those white cubes, right? It's very sterile and it's sometimes a bit intimidating as well. And what I love if I do an installation in those spaces is to see people straight away letting their guard down and, starting to interact with the food and therefore starting to interact with each other. And so it really becomes like a means for connection, something that's almost, playful, almost in a childish way. I love to use food as a way to, make people just let their guards down and connect with each other in a way that's very innocent. That's immensely fun to do.
I love that. So for folks that maybe aren't familiar with your work, can you kind of describe what, maybe not a typical experience, but kind of the types of experiences that you bring together that do blend food and art practice together? Like, what is your approach, just more generally, and then we'll dive into the project that you did for Future Money.
So I translate concepts and creative briefs into edible form. So it can come from, a brand, it can come from a gallery if there's an opening, and I would translate the concept or the aesthetics or the values or the impressions of the art that exhibited at that time into an installation. If I work with a brand, it will be to reflect brand identity and translate into, again, could be canapes or it could be a curated dinner. Recently, I created a dinner around the theme of the 4 elements. So it was air, water, fire, earth. And it was for a brand that had something to do with astrology, and astrology being about the elements. So we had this idea of curating a dinner, around the 4 elements. So that's the kind of work that I do. And more rarely, I do. The concept just comes from me, and then it becomes just an artwork. So at the moment, I'm working with a friend around the concept of seeds, and we want to do an installation regarding seeds and people to come and like a seeds candy shop, and people can come and choose their seeds and then pass them around or send them to loved ones. So it's very, very diverse. But yeah, as a summary, I translate ideas and concepts into something that people can eat and taste and sense and play with. Yeah.
How do you make these connections? Like when you said like the food and a brand identity, how do you come up with that?
It becomes very intuitive because I've been doing it for so long that I don't even think anymore. It happens very fast, but usually I will start the process by looking at the artwork or looking at the visual identity of the brand and just write some keywords, I don't know, like, a bit dark or a bit playful or colorful. And then I would sort of like automatically translate it in certain ingredients or certain visuals. And I will put all the pieces together. But I start with keywords usually. Like this year, I did an event in Amsterdam in Soho House, and it was about abstract music. And I had to translate the concept of abstract music into food. I just played the sound, and I just wrote the keywords that were emerging upon hearing the music. And then I started associating those keywords with certain ingredients and certain shapes and forms as well, and certain colors.
Did you take the same steps for the artwork you've created for the Future Money Arts and Culture Grant? Because then you use barley.
I use barley, yes. And it's funny because I have a notebook with ideas that I want to explore.
Mm-hmm.
And in January this year, there were two main ideas that I wanted to explore, and I decided to explore, and I set myself to explore in one way or another. One of them was grain as the origin of money.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was blending 3D technology with food. It was two ideas, and I was really, really like adamant that I was gonna do it somehow. And then the brief came, and I was like, something clicked, and I was like, well, this is perfect. I know just what to do. But those were ideas that I've had like a few weeks prior already, and they were already brewing for a while.
Yeah. And I think this starts to blend in that kind of like third aspect of your work, which is your studies that you're currently doing. And I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit more about how you're learning and what you're studying specifically in your master's program, agriculture and ecology, and how that infuses itself into the work that you were conceptualizing for Future Money.
Yeah. So my master's is in agroecology. It's called agroecology and sustainable food systems. So we're basically trying to answer the question, how can we feed, the entirety of the human population in a way that's as equitable as possible, while still making sure that we create a hospitable living environment for all other species. And for me, it was a very, very natural question to ask, having worked with food for such a long time. And I can see that resources are not necessarily shared in a way that's equitable. And there's a lot of discrepancies and inequities that really need to be addressed. So there's a social justice aspect to food, which is there, whether you choose to look the other way or not, it's there, okay? From the moment you start working with food, it's political, full stop. So that's why the brief really resonated with me, because it's also about equity and social justice, and how can we fluidify the exchange of those resources online. But of course, it's only talking about a different medium, in this case, currency, online currency, something completely immaterial. And with me, my language would be the language of food, which is something that's very tangible. But therefore, I saw an interesting bridge to gap and to explore in that. I was incredibly inspired.
So if you could just share with us the work that you ended up developing to be displayed at the Future Money Open Studios, and would love for you to walk us through both the composition of the piece that you displayed as well as the material that you chose and what it represents.
So I used barley and obsidian that I displayed on a platform of plexiglass. And on top of that, I put a hologram projector. And the projection was that of an ancient goddess, Shala, who was the goddess of agriculture in Mesopotamia some 1,000 years ago. And the barley and the obsidian symbolize currency in ancient times in the Levant, in Mesopotamia. And the idea was, well, besides the visual aspect, which is, the barley is, gold with the lighting, and the obsidian is black. So you have a contrast between gold and black. And then you have this sort of like spectral, statuette hovering over it. And I wanted it to look a bit like a shrine, so something very meditative and a bit esoteric and a bit mysterious. And I want people to come in and be like, what is that? What is this about? But the idea more explicitly was to retrace the genesis of currency from something very tangible and material that comes from the earth, so grains and stones, and therefore something a bit more democratic because, more simple to share, into currency evolving into something very immaterial and very abstract, and therefore potentially less democratic because it becomes so abstract that it's almost difficult to grasp. You hear about certain sums now being exchanged and you don't even understand what it represents. Also, the idea with currency being immaterial is that it risks leaving certain communities behind because not everybody has the same access to technology. So the idea was to play with the contrast between material and immaterial, and ask the question, what future do we envision? How can we best share the planet's resources, first of all? What's the best way to share the resources? And what kind of future do we want for technology? How do we envision that future? How can we ensure that technology remains human, in the future? Is there a spiritual aspect to technology as well? That's a question I'm really interested in, because if it's spiritual, it's also human at the same time. That was the idea behind the genesis of currency, from tangible matter into something really abstract and elusive.
Do you believe with any of the conversations you had at the summit, they could answer the questions you were now posing?
I had a few conversations about that. And I have to say that everybody seemed very optimistic about the future of, online payments. I was surprised because I have to say it's a world I was not familiar with, and that was the fun aspect about it, because I was, I didn't know much about open payments online, and talking firsthand with people who do that day in, day out. It opened up a whole new world for me. And I think also because they were not expecting to see art at the convention, it was a bit of a interesting, meeting of people who shouldn't be exchanging. But hey, here we are having conversations about the same subject using a different language, but we're talking about the same thing. And I thought that was really just super cool. And in terms of answering that question, what everybody I spoke to believes that there should be, and that there can be more equity regarding open payments. Everybody I spoke to really believe that, because that's what they do, that's what they're working on, and they're seeing results, from what I saw, from what they shared. It made me also quite optimistic,
Does it then also inspire you to, because I know you're continuing right now with essays?
Yeah, I wanted to write about that. And I was also really interested in the fact, again, that two different types of communities, artists and technologists, would you call them, meet in a space where, maybe they're not really expecting to meet each other, or they're not really expecting to have those sort of conversations, and the innocence that it creates. And I think for us as artists, I don't know what the other artists thought, but it was almost even better because people enter the space with a kind of innocence that makes for a very open reception of what they see. And I think that's why I had such, interesting conversations and really heartfelt reactions from people. And for me, this mode of, the audience is not there for that. That was such an interesting thing at the summit for me. So in the essay, I'm discussing that. And yes, also I'm touching upon this whole new world for me of equity and social justice within the world of technology, and to which I can draw a parallel with, equity and social justice in the world of food, which I know a lot more about, and I know a lot of people who are involved in that. It's a very interesting subject for me to develop after this experience.
You came to the summit to present your work with a certain set of ideals and principles, and how did the summit inform or better kind of advance those concepts or challenge them in any way?
I think being at the summit and exchanging with everyone there, I realized something I didn't know, and is that technology can actually be used, if it's put in the right hands of the right people, it can be used as a tool for equity. And that was a whole new world for me, because I have to say that I wasn't very optimistic in the sense that, here, for instance, in Paris, we have a lot of homelessness, and we have this whole debate, everybody's paying, with card now, and very few people have change on them. And I actually always make sure that I have change with me, because there's always someone who needs it. I had this idea, and I was under this impression that a transition, as fast as it's happening as well, towards, immaterial currency, was definitely something, and I still think it's something that should go slower, so we can actually understand what we're doing as we're doing it. But being at the summit and hearing, case studies and concrete examples of people looking for solutions to use technology as really a tool for more equitable, financial exchanges, that was new to me. But, I didn't like with the installation that I made, I wasn't really making a stand as in, it's good or it's bad, because I'm never sure whether something is really good or really bad. And I'm not there to say, I don't see myself as an activist. And I'm not really there to say, this is the way. I'm interested in asking questions, and with this installation, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to ask questions, how can we best share resources, and what kind of technological future do we want, and how do we envision technology in the future? So I have to say, I did go there with a pretty open mind to start with, but I was still surprised.
I know that this project or this art piece that you exhibited at the Future Money Open Studios was your first art piece that wasn't like a food experience per se. And it was more of a traditional kind of sculpture work. And so I'm curious about just what the experience of, as a practicing artist, of entering in, being part of the Future Money artist cohort, how it advances your own thinking around your art practice, and the themes that you bring into your work.
Mm-hmm. There's a permanency that was interesting for me to experience with this installation, because usually if I do an installation, it's temporary. It lasts for a few hours, and it's almost like a performance in the sense that I set up the stage, whether it's a dinner or whether it's an installation, but I'm not performing. The guests are performing. It's always, improvisation, because I never know what's going to happen, how they're going to interact. And so there's a performance aspect to that, which goes with the fact that it's immediate and temporary. And here it was permanent. So it was there for 3 days. It could have been there for a whole year. So the relationship to time was different. And it was a lot slower. And actually, it was great because it was almost, something meditative about it, which was perfect, because I wanted my piece to be very meditative, almost like a shrine, and, silent and in the dark, and something that you observe from a distance and you wonder what it is. And, you can't touch it because you can't touch the hologram projector, because, health and safety is actually quite dangerous. So almost like you keep a respectful distance. So it was completely different, than what I'm used to doing. But it was very interesting because I felt like it really fit the work and what I was trying to convey with it. I have to say, I wish, but it wasn't possible for logistics reasons, but I wish I could have, at the end, take the barley, cook it, make a community dinner, and share it. And that would have been the performance aspect to round it off. And that would have, illustrated further the point that I was trying to make about sharing the resources, sharing resources in an equitable way. It would have been the perfect ending to it, but we couldn't for logistical reasons. But that would have been fantastic. So I want to go further with that and do something that people can interact with, because this one was like a shrine, and sometimes you can't touch and just look and you just reflect.
Once you actually set everything up, did it feel as a shrine for you?
Yes, it did. The way people reacted to it as well, it was very interesting, because I don't know, they were just wondering what it was, and I was observing them, and they were just looking at each other, what is that? Because it is quite surprising and, visually quite striking. Mm-hmm. To me, it did really look like a shrine. The fact that it was, in the dark and the room was quite silent, and people would enter the room with, it was a very chill energy in the room. Basically, I wanted it to look like spectral. And the fact that it was just at the entrance as well, I think it was a good timing to sort of like open with that.
How big was the piece?
The platform itself was 1 meter by 1 meter, but the space was probably 150 by 150. And there was black curtains all around, so it was very dark. It was like in this dark sort of shrine. And the only sources of light were the hologram projector, the 3D statuettes, mm-hmm. and some yellow light that we used for the barley to make it look like it was glowing.
to me, there's kind of connotes an element, and there's an explicit element essentially of spirituality, right? Yeah. With the deity that you demonstrated through the hologram.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm wondering, like, with that overlay of spirituality, spiritual practice, like how, because that's an unusual element to bring into conversations about money and economies and even financial inclusion, which is what we're walking our way up into. So I'm curious, like, obviously there was an intention behind that, but if there's anything more you'd want to share about that element of spiritual practice, which oftentimes is absent from these dialogues about currency, money, economies.
I think perhaps it has to do with values, because for me, if we talk about spirituality, we talk about, you know, the human, and for me, it was about bringing a human aspect to money and currency, you know, and to technology, which are two entities which are usually seen as quite cold, you know, lacking humanity, lacking tangibility, lacking warmth, and bringing a human / spiritual, because for me, they go together, aspect to those two entities is very juicy and I think very relevant, because then you can ask the right questions. You know, what kind of values do we want to infuse technology with, and what kind of values do we want to infuse financial systems with? So it was more to enter that reflective space to, you know, consider those questions.
With that in mind, though, because I'm thinking about the future, like with all of these value systems and your value system, especially what you incorporate then in your artwork, because I do believe that the materials that you used are based on your values, of course, the decisions that you make. How would you envision the finance of the future?
I mean, obviously, facilitating access to technology, that's inevitable, because the transition from tangible currency to abstract currency, as I like to call it, is inevitable. Facilitating access to technology. Besides that, I would say I'm still a little bit old school in the sense that I do think that we still should be given the choice of using immaterial ways to pay or using, coins and notes. It's important to still have the choice in the future if we want to use physical money. But I do think that our systems are so complex now that we can't go back to a simple barter system. So, but in terms of sharing resources in a way that's equitable, I mean, for me, I have to think about food straight away. And for me, it seems that there's a lot of superficial, you know, objects that we're being offered and proposed with at all time. And I just want to quote someone that I really admire, and he's an artist who works with food as well. And his name is, he goes by the name of Fermental Health. And he says, we don't need any more stuff. We need food, soil, and housing. And for me, this little like back to basics mindset is very important if we want to move in the right direction. And, you know, money and technology within that equation should really, you know, remain tools and facilitators in that direction, as opposed to just take over as, you know, masters. Technology is not the master. Money is not the master. They have their place. They're essential, but they are tools for whatever else is more important, or whatever else is important for human society to function in a way that's, you know, peaceful and fluid and performs best for everybody involved.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree with that.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say, of course, it's not, because some people, this is just informal chat to you now, but, you know, oh, money is good, money is bad, technology is good, technology is bad. It's not that. It's how we use them. It's how we use them. And as soon as we use them mindfully as tools for bigger values, then they can be of tremendous help towards, you know, going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's beautifully said.
Definitely. I love that.
Yeah. So thank you, Lena. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast, the Future Money Podcast.
My pleasure.
To learn more about the Interledger Foundation, visit our website where you can find all of the published episodes
and more information on our guests, grant programs, and our resources at interledger.org.
Thank you for listening.